Hello everyone, Russ of Aquarimax here. Today I am joined by Captain Squinty, our little gecko here. This is the famed gecko that was born without a father, a parthenote. He appeared one day in his mother's tank, his mother never having made it, and you can go back and check a little bit more about the day we discovered him. We have a video that was taken just a few minutes after we found him, and a couple of update videos. As you can see, he looks normal on this side, and this side his eye never developed properly. But other than that, he's a pretty happy gecko. Doragon has a question. Go ahead, Doragon. Be happy to answer if I can. How active are the morning geckos? Well, I would say they're really pretty active, but they are, during the day. Not very, except when you feed them. If you feed them, especially if you feed them at a specific time, they will learn to be very active at that time. And they can be active at various times throughout the day. Definitely during feeding time. At other times, not as much, but you will just randomly see one active occasionally. But they're much, much more active at night. So, for example, when I walk by one of the morning gecko enclosures during the day, I'm likely to see them, but usually in a resting position. It's not like they're all invisible, but they're usually resting. And then when I feed them, they are very active for a while. However, if I walk by during the night, it doesn't matter if it's feeding time or not, they'll all be out, tail wagging at each other, jumping around, doing that sort of thing. So hopefully that helps. Looks like we got a couple more chats in here. Andrew, welcome. And that Silky Chicken, welcome back. And Doragon says, and how loud are the bumblebee dart frogs? Well, they're loud enough to hear from across the room, maybe in the next room, possibly, not super loud. Nancy C., welcome. I'm going to ignore the telephone for right now so I can pay attention to all of you. Thanks for joining me, by the way. Yeah, they're not extremely loud, like not distractingly loud usually, but if I'm in the kitchen that adjoins the living room that the frogs are in, I will hear them. If I'm down the hall, I probably won't. I hope that helps. I wish I had a more precise measurement for you, but if that gives you an idea. And Andrews Chen says, Russ, how can you prevent grain mites and pests from getting into your cricket food? You know, that's hard. It is. It's not the easiest thing to do. I would say one thing you can do, though, probably the best things you can do, is either put some anti-mite paper near it, not with the food obviously, but near it. Or the best thing that I would suggest is getting some food-grade diatomaceous earth and sprinkling it around like a tray, and then keeping the food on that tray with kind of a moat of diatomaceous earth around it. That would probably be what I would do. You can also, let's see, if you keep the cricket food, if you're not using a lot of it and you're allowed to keep it in the fridge, that's a good way to help reduce the number of mites you'll be dealing with. One issue is that sometimes the mites are actually in the food when you buy it, even if it's packaged and sealed, so you can't always eliminate them, but those are some things you can do that might help. So one thing I wanted to do, everyone here, was do a live feeding of Captain Squinty here. Captain Squinty's name used to be Tiki 2 because of his mother, Tiki, but we decided to, he's getting a little preemptive biting in there. Unfortunately, as you can imagine from the eye issue that Captain Squinty has on the other side, he's not going to let us see it right now, but anyway, you can't see all that well from that eye at all, and so we have to feed him by hand when we're giving him crickets. He's fine with finding CGD by smell. Ooh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make sure you can see this. Here we go. Ooh, nice shot. But he's pretty good at taking the crickets. He's very enthusiastic about it. He just doesn't have very good aim. And when he starts smelling crickets, he'll start biting whatever is around. I can't really blame him. Like, he's just trying to get his dinner. Let's see if I can change his angle just a little bit. It's a little bit challenging trying to figure out this angle from here, but here you can see the other eye, and there he goes. Took another cricket. Luckily, he's always been an enthusiastic eater. Haven't had to worry about that at all from the time he was tiny. The crickets he was taking at that time. Stuggy, yes. Oh, I just lost a cricket. Hold on just a second. Hello. Stuggy's back with us, and he says, nice gecko, is this the offspring of the supposedly parthenogenetic female? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. We still haven't heard back from... Ooh, nice shot. Still haven't heard back from the results of the study, if that is indeed documented, but we still suspect that's the case. Can't really see any other possibility since the mother has never mated and we had her since she was a hatchling, so we're hoping that that turns out to be true. All right, I'm going to give him a minute to swallow. There he goes. Am I in focus? If anybody can let me know. It's a little challenging to be operating all the controls and holding a gecko and a container of crickets. So if I'm not in focus, I will do my best, but let me know if that is the case or if I am in focus. Any kind of feedback regarding the focus would be most welcome. Oh, it's pretty focused. Okay, thank you. There he goes. You can see he's grown quite a bit from the tiny little hatchling he was, if you've been following since the time that he was hatched, and is very obviously a male, as you can see. I'm going to try a slightly bigger cricket. Don't want to get too big, but see how he does with this one if he wants it. That's a bad angle. I apologize for that. Doing this backwards is more challenging than one might suppose. Oh, I can't even see what I'm doing now. Sorry, bud. Do you want that cricket? Oh, he's still swallowing. There we go. Took a shot at it. Stuggy said, I never kept crested geckos. Do they require any heating or lights like quite a few other reptiles do? They don't require heating as long as the temperatures are within, regular room temperature. So about, well, I would say at night, no lower than high 50s, and during the day, at least in the mid 70s or even low 70s are probably fine during the winter. So if you can manage that and they don't go over 85 degrees, then they're fine. They do really well at those temperatures. And I would say, as far as lighting goes, they don't require UVB. They probably will benefit from it. Almost certainly they will benefit from UVB, but they don't require it as long as they get vitamin D3 dietarily. So they're really pretty easy, and that was one of the things that attracted us to crested geckos. That and the fact that they can be kept in naturalistic vivarium so that you can have the cleanup crew and the plants take care of most of the maintenance duties. So, yep, they're really pretty easy to do. All right, well, I think what I'm going to do now, I think I'm going to try one more cricket and see how he does with that. And if he's done, I will put him away and we'll open it up to more Q&A on whatever aquarium vivarium topic you want. Just try one more. Oh, I brought a couple of more crickets with me than I anticipated. Okay, you want to try one more? He's licking it. I don't know if you can see that, but he doesn't seem all that interested in eating it. Sometimes they'll just lick the vitamin and mineral powder right off. Okay, well, he's not all that into it. So I'm going to put him away here. I'm going to stay here while I do that, so you don't have to wonder where I've gone. I'm going to move this over here so I can put him in, and we are good to go. So I'm opening it to questions and answers of various sorts. Pardon me while I reseal the enclosure here. I'll put the lid back on. Come back into the shot after that. Okay, I'm back in. So opening it up now. If there is interest in any questions and answers, I'll be happy to do that. Let's see. And while we're going on here, now that I put the gecko away, I'll just give a quick update. I just wanted to mention the endlers that I did a live stream about maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago, something like that. They are breeding like crazy. I have probably something like 60 of them now. So that's pretty exciting. If you want to check out that video, kind of see how they're doing. 4 mature males and probably most of the fish in the tank, probably at least 40 of the fish in the tank are fry. So it's pretty exciting. I'm enjoying that. I'm trying to get the plants to grow in to keep up with the little endlers. But it's a lot of fun. Let's see. Checking out the chat, make sure I don't miss anything. Brandon Berry says, hey, glad to catch you again on the live stream. Looking forward to seeing the geckos. Well, let me see if I can pull this gecko out, because I just put one away. I just fed him. But I can take him out again. No reason why I can't. This is Captain Squinty right here. Let's see. You can see his good eye on this side. And oh, thank you. That was very obliging of you. Captain Squinty. See his other side with his eye that didn't quite develop very well. It's grown a little bit since he was tiny, but he's definitely got issues with that eye. Can't really see out of it. But other than that, he does really well. All right, and Stuggy says, I wanted to say thanks for that special springtail food you sent me with my contest prize. It really made my colony boom finally. And I'm super happy about it. Well, that's great to hear. I really like that springtail food. I'm glad I'm glad my experiment worked. Basically, a number of months ago, I was just trying to figure out how to make my springtails really boom, and I mixed a few foods together and came up with that. So, really glad it worked. It's been pretty popular with people who come buy bugs from me, and I do ship it out with most of my, at least a lot of my orders. I need to just do it with all of them. I think sometimes I forget unless people ask. Okay, Nancy C says, I have somehow gotten some orange-colored spider mites in my orange isopod culture. Ooh, have you ever experienced that? If so, how did you handle it? Well, yeah, I have seen a few isopod cultures with, oh, I'm sorry, jumping right on the microphone there. I've seen some mites in isopod cultures before. Typically, I haven't had serious problems with it since I ended up getting some predatory mites, I think accidentally with some millipedes or something like that. And the predatory mites got into a lot of the enclosures and cleaned out the mites. So I haven't had problems with that. So some people do order predatory mites specifically for that purpose. It's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is keep springtails with your isopods. They don't kill the mites, but they do compete with the mites. And if you have you have a healthy springtail population in with your isopods, you're unlikely to have mite problems. And I think that's mostly what's going on in most of my cultures now. I have lots of springtails in, I think, all of my isopod cultures now, and I really don't have issues with mites. So that would be my recommendation. If you do have a lot of mites, what I would say is start over. You don't have to necessarily get rid of the isopods, but try to get the isopods out of the culture without bringing along any of the mites. Put some springtails in the new culture and discard the old substrate. That's what I would do in this case. Hopefully that helps. It's a great question, Nancy C. Thank you. Jack Bordeaux says, what would you recommend saying to convince my parents into letting me get morning geckos? Well, it kind of depends what their stance is on pets. Like, what are do they already have objections in general towards pets that you can address directly? Is it, because if they have concerns about maintenance or cost or things like that, if that can help me know what things you can say. But in terms of maintenance, you can mention that most reptiles need heat lamps and things like that, and they don't, along with crested geckos and a few others. There are several that don't, but morning geckos are among those. You could mention that they don't need a large enclosure. you can have quite a few geckos in a pretty reasonably sized enclosure, so that could be something that might help them. You can also mention the fact that they don't need live insects for food. You can keep mourning geckos quite happily with nothing but crested gecko diet for their entire lives, and they'll do fine. I like to give mine live insects, and I do, but they don't need it. They'll be fine without it. So those might be a couple of things you can try. Nancy C says, I have since started putting the mite... Oh, hold on, I just lost the chat. Okay. Nancy C says, I have since started putting on the mite paper to keep it from getting worse. I did lose my lovely springtail cultures to those mites. Yeah, and mites, there's some really interesting things you can do when you have a springtail culture infested with mites. One thing is that the predatory mites do eat springtails as well as mites. I think they preferentially go for mites, but they will eat springtails as well. So that could be an issue. One thing I've heard, and I haven't tried this particular thing, but if you have a springtail culture that is infested with mites, you can, well, I guess this depends entirely on whether or not you have dart frogs, and you do have some things that indicate you might, but I'm not sure if you do. But you can put them in with, you put the entire culture in a dart frog enclosure and let the dart frogs eat the mites, because they will, and it doesn't hurt them. And then there'll be some springtail eggs left over once they've picked the charcoal, basically gotten rid of most of the mites. You just keep it in there until they seem to be gone, then take it back out, and then let the springtail eggs hatch. And springtail eggs are pretty resilient. I had a culture of springtails that was closed, and I had thought it had crashed. I thought there weren't any springtails in it anymore. And then a few months later, I just said, I'm going to experiment with this, and I put some food in it. It was like a cocoa fiber culture with a couple of leaves in it. And so I sprinkled a little bit of food on it, waited a few days, and saw a few tiny springtails. So I just kept feeding it, and that culture grew into a really healthy culture, and it's thriving to this day. So you might be able to do the same thing with some of your expired cultures. Well, not expired cultures, but cultures that seem to be overwhelmed. If you're able to clean them off like that, that might help. And then CC says, thank you for the advice. I will definitely be more mindful of checking on them from now on. Yeah, those mites can be, it can be a fast process from the time that you notice the first mites until the culture has crashed. And Nancy C also says, by the way, my 2 mourning geckos from you are doing great. They have just moved into an 18 by 18 by 36 exoterra enclosure, and I'm hoping for a growing group in the future. Oh, sounds like you're off to a great start. In an enclosure that big, you could easily house, I would say, probably like 16 adult geckos and whatever offspring they're having until, I wouldn't keep more than probably 16 adults in there, but you could easily do that. And NCC says, I do have dart frogs, good to know. Excellent. So maybe that will be of use. You can try that out. I've never tried it, but I have heard it from dart froggers who say that it works for them. So it's worth a shot. And if you can get, the trick is with the mite springtail isopod balance. You really have to get the isopods and springtails thriving for a while before you before the mites get in there. Otherwise, it's a kind of an arms race. Whoever gets there first and starts thriving first is the one that's going to win, is unfortunately often the case. So if you can get those springtails and isopods doing well together before the mites come along, you can usually kind of beat them at their game. So hopefully that helps. And Nancy C says, thank you very much, appreciate it. No problem, thanks for joining, and I really hope that you have success with all of your cultures. Do you have just orange isopods, or do you have other types of isopods? And have you lost, at this point, do you not have any springtail cultures? Is that correct? One thing I've noticed just in mentioning here, Captain Squinty's mother has just a few spots, a few Dalmatian spots, not very many. And he has quite a few more than she does, which is interesting because if he is indeed a parthenode and she is both the mother and the father, so to speak, because she will have fertilized her own egg, uh, with a polar body, then this would be a codominant trait, and he'd get the double dose of the gene. So he has more than she does, which is pretty interesting to me. And it's just one little bit of evidence that would indicate that he is indeed a gecko with only one parent. Nancy C says, I have dwarf purple, large purple, dwarf white, and powder blue. They're all doing good. I was able to save a little of the springtails. Hopefully they will get going again soon. Okay, good. Good. What type of springtail do you have? I've found that the Cinella curvicetta do really well for me and outcompete the other springtails, but if they're both together. But the Fulsomia candida will breed faster if they're by themselves, if they don't have to compete with another species of springtail. So, just curious about that. And I have found that the Cinella curvicetta species will get into my other enclosures, just the enclosures that are adjacent to theirs, they'll get in there. So Nancy C says the ones I lost were giant springtails. The ones I managed to save were of the temperate. Okay. Oh, and Potato Derp says hi. Potato Derp is here. Great. Thanks for joining us. And Brendan Berry says, any tips on handling cresties? I've heard a lot of mixed opinions online, but I want to hear some of what you have found works for you. Okay. Do you mean taming them or particular ways of picking them up? Or, yeah, let me know what you mean exactly. I'm happy to help. I just want to make sure I'm answering the specific question that you're asking. Because in general, I found cresties to be really easy to handle. We handled our first crestie from the time we bought her when she was a month old. We handled her gently daily. We had heard differing opinions, like you say, on that. But the breeder said that she handled them every day from the time that they hatched, and that was a good way to keep them tame, and it worked for her because she is such a sweet gecko. She loves to be handled. She actively asks to be let out by jumping against the glass when she is in the mood to come out. So Brendan Berry says, general handling tips, like would you say it's best to handle them every day, or is it best to leave them alone? Well, it depends on what you want from the gecko. If you just want a display animal that you can watch in the enclosure and you don't mind that, then I would say don't handle it, and it'll be fine. It's not going to miss it really if it's never really getting handled. But I would say that if you want a gecko that you can handle, they're really pretty amenable to it. I know people have different philosophies on whether or not reptiles tolerate handling or they actually enjoy it, or just things like that. But I would say if you enjoy handling the gecko and the gecko seems to be relaxed when you're handling it, go ahead and do it, and do it every day. Just don't do it for too long, maybe no more than half an hour a day, and it'll be perfectly fine. And if you have a day when you don't do it, it's not going to be a big issue for the gecko. So hopefully that helps. We have pretty much always hand-fed those of our crested geckos that seem to react well to hand feeding. We have 3, 2 of them, including this one, enjoy being hand-fed. Our male crested gecko, Jake, doesn't really like it that much. I will give him crested gecko diet by hand once in a while, but he really doesn't like being hand-fed crickets and doesn't even like eating insects that much. So I just hand-feed him crested gecko diet once in a while, but other than that, I don't. But the other 2, we don't feed them insects inside their cage. We do give them crested gecko diet, but all of their insects they basically eat out of their cage, or at least sometimes we'll put them into their cage by hand and hold the insect in our hand so it doesn't get loose in the cage and they'll eat it. And Stuggy says, my original springtail colony had mites in them, so I flat out didn't feed the colony until all the mites died. Doing this caused my springtail shortage that you saved with the springtail food you sent. Oh, good. So you kind of did a similar thing to what I suggested with the frogs, killing the mites by starvation instead of the frogs, and then the springtails, they sprang back into life. So yeah, that works. Brendan Berry said, mine seems to not mind handling for sure, but I still can't tell if they are truly stressed out or enjoying it. Yeah, it's really impossible to tell, I guess, but ours don't seem to show signs of stress when we handle them. And I think the one male that I told you about, Jake, he sometimes acts as if he's calmed down since we got him somewhat, but he doesn't seem to he seems a little bit more stressed out when we handle him, and we don't do it as often, honestly. But the other two actually seem perfectly fine when they're handled, and I think it has to do with the fact that they're handled from a very young age, basically from hatching. So I think that has a lot to do with it, but like I said, it's really impossible to say, but I don't really think it stresses them out as long as you're gentle, as I'm sure you are. Potato Derp says, I call my leopard gecko Sam-O-Nella. Get it? It sounds like salmonella because she carries salmonella. I've never heard that one, but it's kind of funny. Brandon Berry says, how do you get him out of the vivarium? That's the biggest problem I'm having. He always avoids my hand and would never want to come aboard voluntarily. Okay. Well, as I mentioned, one of our geckos will actually, when she's awake and we're near the enclosure, she'll often want to come out by jumping up against the door, and then we'll open the door and she'll often jump out onto us. But it's not always that easy, not even with her. Sometimes she's a little bit more asleep when we take her out. And generally, she has a couple of spots she likes to sleep on. She's got her manzanita branches, and she has a couple of spots on there. She'll sleep, and we can just kind of gently scoop her off. Or she has a sansevieria snake plant that she will sleep on, and we can scoop her off of that. And that's what we do. We just kind of very gently ease her off onto our hand, and it wakes her up enough that she steps onto our hand. And this little guy is very much the same. He's got a different enclosure, but he's got some vines and some sticks and things in there, or he's got a little cork bark hide, and we just will lift up the hide and let him crawl onto our hand, or we'll gently scoop him off the wall of the enclosure or the sticks or whatever. And he does not seem to avoid our hands. Jake, my other one, does sometimes seem to avoid my hands, and I have to kind of follow around the enclosure until I can get him towards the door, kind of herd him towards the door. So that is, that you may have one that does something more like that. And if you have to herd him towards the door until he kind of jumps out on you or something like that, or until you can scoop him up, that may be the best thing in your situation. So HC Aqua says, hello, hello. Hello, HC Aqua. Nice to see you again. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to those of you who have hit the like button. And if you'd like to do so and you haven't done so, it would be much appreciated. It helps me get a chance to do more live streams because more people see it. So, oh, thank you. I see it's happening. Got some people clicking the like button up there. So, excellent. I really appreciate that. So, any other questions? Did that help, Brandon? Hopefully. Potato Derp says, my gecko seems to enjoy being handled. She's a leopard gecko, you said. She begs for attention like a dog, and when I offer my hand, she runs onto my shoulder. Yeah, so your gecko seems a little bit like our oldest crested gecko, Tiki. She's very much like that. So I think when you see something like that, when you put out your hand and they crawl right onto it, I think that's a pretty good sign that they're interested in handling. Here's a question, Potato Derp. Do you ever feed your gecko by hand when you have the gecko out? Do you think that's related, or does the gecko get any sort of treats or special treatment when she's out that might kind of motivate her, or is it just seeming to like the attention, pure and simple? By the way, Potato Derp, you said you were going to mention a story during the live stream, so be interested in hearing what that was. We got some more likes. Thank you. Much appreciated. Wow, time really flies here. In just a few minutes, I'm going to need to go. I've got somebody coming over to buy things in a little while here. But I don't have to go immediately. Oops, sorry there. Didn't mean to bump you like that. Nancy C says, those morning geckos sure are fast. Indeed they are. Very speedy little geckos. And I've noticed with morning geckos, with handling, if you handle them from the time they're a tiny hatchling, they'll actually do fairly well, but they're always going to be a lot more skittish than, say, a crested gecko or a leopard gecko, but they're still fun. And as soon as you stop handling, though, morning geckos, they tend to get skittish again. So I would say if you're going to handle morning geckos, not that I necessarily recommend it, if you're going to handle them, it's not, you kind of have to keep it up, or they don't really stay tame, so to speak. Okay, Potato Drip says, occasionally you give her a treat, but I usually put her food out in the tank for her to hunt. I don't think it's related to her liking being handled. Okay, that's cool. So there's something else that seems to motivate your gecko to want to climb up your arm, which I think is really cool. Who knows what it is? It may be companionship as far as I know. I mean, we don't really know what's going on in our little reptiles' heads, but I like to think that we don't give them enough credit, personally. So it could very well be that there's just some enjoyment going on there. Stuggy says, hey, what do you use as feeder insects? Just crickets, or do you also keep dubias? Just wondering. Well, for my geckos, my crested geckos specifically, I use crickets and crickets. That's it for live foods, because I give crested gecko diet as a main component of the diet as well. I don't have any dubias or any other kind of roaches because my wife has vetoed those. They're on the short list of vetoed creatures. So I don't have dubias. I probably would breed roaches of 1 or 2 species if my wife were okay with it, but she's not. So I don't. But of course, I have a lot of other feeder insects for my others. For the morning geckos, I give them the fruit flies. I have 3 different types of fruit flies that I offer them. I've got the winged melanogaster and the wingless melanogaster and the Heidii, the larger flies, as well as rice flower beetle larvae. And then I occasionally give them other things. And they get springtails and isopods as well in the microfauna in their enclosure. So Potato Derp says, here's the fairy shrimp story. I had some eggs laying around, so I put them in a 10-gallon tank and turned the heater to 88 degrees Fahrenheit. He's going to continue because he's run out of space. We'll see what he says next. So Stuggy, in your avatar, is that your own scorpion? Or what is that? So we put the eggs in a 10-gallon tank, turn the heater to 88 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, sorry. See if I can get it back here. Waiting for the rest of it. You've gotten quite a little workout walking around, haven't you? Okay, checking. Okay, I'm going to put this little gecko away. So, all right, Captain Squinty, are you going to face the camera for us and say bye, everybody? Nancy says, Nancy C. about her morning gecko says, they are so easy. They don't smell at all. They are quiet, and they are nowhere near as messy as crickets. I'm not a fan of bugs at all, and the crickets and I fight nightly. They freak me out. Yeah, talking about roaches, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, I wish I could. And then Nancy C. says, but strangely, the roaches don't bother me like the crickets, as long as I don't see too many of the big ones all at once. Yeah, and I wish my wife were that way, but I do love her the way she is, so I'll just have to deal with it. But yeah, I totally see what you're saying. I would do roaches if I could. Steggy says it's a dead Catalinea minima, a species very recently discovered, that my dad brought to me from his workplace. He just happens to be working on the island where they are found. Cool. So Potato Derp is back to his fairy shrimp. He put them in the tank at 88 degrees. He says, I thought they were Thamnocephalus and Triops. I previously had bad experience with Brachynephila pachardi. They invaded my previous tank and killed off all the other branchiopods. Oh, wow. So Thamnocephalus are like the beaver tails, and Brachynephila include, like Brachynephila gigas, a very large carnivorous species of fairy shrimp that gets like 2.5 inches long. They're really big. So he had bad experience with that species before. I can only imagine keeping carnivorous fairy shrimp. That must be something. Kind of like a feather crossed with a mantis that lives in the water. How would that be? I've never kept any of the carnivorous types. I've kept several types of fairy shrimp, but some of them actually pretty big ones, but never a carnivorous variety. They are not cheap. I thought they would be interesting to keep at some point, but they're not cheap. So I'm going to put this little guy back in his vivarium just a second. We actually got a larger vivarium, this temporary one that I'm using, the plastic tote version. This one here. is going to be replaced very soon by a larger one, a larger Exoterra that we've got for him. Nancy C says, have you ever kept fire-bellied toads? I had a very brief experience with fire-bellied toads. My brother and his kids had one, and they gave theirs to us when, for some reason, they didn't want to keep it or they couldn't or something, a number of years ago, and it was doing really well for us, but it came in kind of, the enclosure they bought it with, and or whatever, wasn't a very good enclosure, wasn't very stable, and we were just keeping it for a few days in there, and we were going to move it to something else. But before we did, our cat knocked over the enclosure. We weren't around at the time, and the frog, or the fire-bellied toad, ended up hopping out. We didn't find it until it was too late, and it was crispy by that time. So unfortunately, that was my very brief experience with fire-bellied toads. But I have thought of setting up a nice paludarium with some fire-bellied toads in it. I think that would be cool. They're very nice, very easy to keep, but striking, and I think they would be fun. But it was a very sad experience we had. Potato Derp says, there's no way in the universe they could survive 88 degrees. They live in very cold temperatures, but guess what? I accidentally raised some super adaptable mega Brachinecta. This will be interesting to see what happens. And Nancy C says, oh no, and mine won't stop having babies. So your fire-bellied toads just keep reproducing, huh? I've seen, even in pet stores where I wouldn't expect, pet stores that are not exactly known for their excellent husbandry, I've seen spawns of fire-bellied toads being, raised there. I'm sure your setup is much better. So they must be pretty easy to breed if this pet store is able to do it. And yeah, I'm sure yours are much happier. But if you're overrun, she says she's overrun. They are the cutest though, and I really enjoy them. I bet that would be a lot of fun. Do you have any market for them? You can't sell them locally or anything like that? I guess this is not a great time to ship things, otherwise you might be able to ship. So, all right. Oh, I'm getting a message from my customer who's coming over to buy some springtails and some other things. So Nancy's saying, I haven't thought about it, to be honest. So it would be interesting to see if you can sell them locally, or to maybe a pet store. And if you have enough, you might even be able to find some place that will take them wholesale if they're gonna, they're gonna be treated well, or at least they have a good chance of being treated well. You could maybe find out about that too. I mean, what kind of numbers do you get? I'm curious about that. Looks like I'm going to have to cut this in just a couple of minutes here. I'm getting a text from someone who says they're ready for me to come buy bugs and plants and things like that. So Nancy says, right now I have about 40 or so. Wow. I wish I had the space. I would buy some from you if I had, but I don't right now, but I would. It would be fun. Potato Derp says, that should be impossible in every way, but I only got Brachinecta packardi, probably partly due to the high temperatures. They grew really, really, really fast. They grew to 2.5 inches in 3 days. Wow. That is crazy. Do you have any video documentation of that? That would be really cool to be able to say, here is the documented growth of these fairy shrimp in 3 days. I don't know if that's ever been done. That would be really cool. Or if you can just duplicate it and film it, that would be really neat. And Nancy C says they just morphed last week. Oh, so they're tiny little froglets. Cool. I'm going to tell you this quick story. My cousin, who's an animal lover like me, both he and his wife and all of their kids are. Well, my other cousin, I should say, his sister, who's of course also my cousin, who's not quite such an animal lover, found a live tree frog, a Pacific tree frog, in a container of salad. A little newly morphed froglet in the container of salad. So my cousin contacted me and said, what should I do? So I gave him a fruit fly culture, or two fruit fly cultures, and some vitamin mineral supplements and so on, and sent him home. And I went to go visit my cousin. We happen to be really good friends. I went to visit him not too long ago, and he showed me their little frog. Their tiny little froglet was now fully grown. It's been since I don't know, the spring or something. Appears fully grown and is doing great and is now big enough to eat crickets. You know, not fully grown crickets, but they now give it a good diet of crickets, have a nice vivarium for it, and it's doing extremely well. So the things you'll find in your salad. Weird. I don't know. Not the same as a firebelly toad, but it just reminded me of that for some reason. Just the little froglets, or toadlets, I guess. They're cool. Ninja 88 says, hello, my zebra pillbugs are thriving. Great. I'm glad that they're doing well for you. Hopefully they'll be breeding soon. And Potato Derp says his fairy shrimp then died and laid lots of eggs. Their life cycle completed in 4 days. I'm going to try to hatch more and document it. Yeah, that would be really cool. That is such an amazingly ephemeral, you know, cycle. 4 days, but getting to 2.5 inches in 4 days, that's amazing. Not even triops do that. That's crazy. That is a cool story. I'm glad to hear that. That is amazing, and I hope we do get to see documentation. And Potato Drip says, are these even bee pachyderdae anymore? They're very different. Their appearance is different, and their life cycle is very different. You know, it could be that it is a different species, but it sounds like that's what you got. But I do know there are species that are influenced, crustacean species specifically, that are influenced, their morphology is influenced by temperature, like Daphnia, by season and temperature. Their body shape actually changes, so it would be interesting to see if that has to do with it too. If you can raise different generations at different temperatures and see if it makes a difference. Well, it looks like it's about time. I've got to go now, so if you haven't hit the like button and you would like to, please do. I would love to get some more likes so we can get this out to more people. That would be awesome. And Zercool says, I enjoy this channel. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate your support, clicking the like button and just joining me today. Potato Drip says they had pretty strange Naupli too. They stayed in Naupli for 2 days. Weird. That is very weird. So Nancy says, thank you very much. I say thank you very much too. Potato Drip says bye, and I'm going to end it right there. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.